Okay, so welcome to this NUPI seminar entitled Radical Islam in Russia, Local and Global Dimensions. As to the term radical Islam, which somebody already reacted to, we will get some explanations for the use of that. And I think since this is a topic which interests us all, and since we also are very lucky to have distinguished guests from Russia, I'll just go straight ahead and introduce to you the first speaker, who is Irina Starodubrovskaya. She works at the Gaidar Institute in Moscow and is head of the Center for Political Economy and Regional Development. She has done extensive research on regional issues and particularly on the Northern Caucasus. And she will speak to us on the issue of, on the topic of radical Islam in Russia, myths or reality. So thank you very much for coming, and we're looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming here, spending your time on listening to the results of my research. I apologize in advance, as I had very little practice in English for the last several years, but I hope we will understand each other. And as I have very limited time, I'll try to concentrate on one issue and just mention the others, but if you have questions, I can go in more details on those issues which you are interested in. So, let's start. Very brief information about my research. I'm doing research on North Caucasus for 7 years, and from these 7 years, 4 years I have spent on the issues of radical Islam. But I am interested in radical Islam not from the religious point of view. I am not an expert on religion at all. I'm interested in radical Islam from the point of view of the societal transformation which the North Caucasus is facing now, and which includes rapid urbanization, the erosion of traditions, different migration processes, globalization processes. And for me, the radical Islam issues are interested as the response for this radical societal transformation. The main regions of my interest are mainly Dagestan, of course. Dagestan is fantastically interesting, but also Chechnya, Kabardino Balkaria, and Karacháyevo-Cherkessia. And from the urban areas, I concentrated on Makhachkala, the capital of Dagestan. Maybe it's the only real city in this region now. And from the rural areas, I tried to make research in 20 rural settlements in different regions and different republics on Dagestan. Some of them are the settlements with serious religious conflict. Some of them are settlements without religious split, so there are different types of them. And of course, I have quite a lot of interviews with the representatives, with the supporters of Islamic fundamentalism, of course, not with the terrorists and combatants, but with those who are in the legal field. But at least there are people of Islamic fundamentalistic views and of different kinds of these views. So we are going, and in the course of my research, I understood that the reality in the North Caucasus is very different from the conventional opinions, from the conventional views, from the conventional understandings in Russian society in general, in expert society, among the decision makers. And actually, today I am going to talk about two main myths on the situation with radical Islam on the North Caucasus. And the first myth is about the causes, about the roots of radical Islam. And the second myth is about the relationship between radical Islam and Islamic terrorism. So let's start with the first myth. What is the substance of this myth? Actually, the causes of radical Islam are usually explained by two main factors. First, it's the influence of some stranger, of some enemy ideology, of those people who try to destabilize Russia, purposely destabilize people from abroad, and the favorable conditions for the propaganda of these people are being created by the very hard economic and social conditions in the North Caucasus, by economic depression, by unemployment, by massive poverty. Actually, this explanation doesn't work. First, it doesn't work because this picture of total economic depression and poverty in the North Caucasus is not true at all. North Caucasus is the region with very extensive shadow economy, and quite large incomes from this shadow economy. And actually, it's the normal territory from the economic points of view. There are depressed territories, there are actively developing territories. But the interesting thing is that the supporters of radical Islam are not concentrated mainly in the depressed territories. They are concentrated in the cities, which by definition are the developing centers. They are concentrated in quite rich rural areas. So we cannot explain the demand for radical ideologies on the basis of these factors of depression, unemployment, and poverty. How can we explain them? I think that we can explain them just by this societal transformation, which I mentioned from the very beginning. Because when the society is in the process of active migration and urbanization, in the process of erosion of traditions, in the process of globalization, it has some very definite and very uncomfortable consequences for the people. First, it's the lack of general rules of the game, of which was named by Emile Durkheim as enemy. Enemy is a lack of rules. It's the lack of general understanding how people should live and on what norms they should base. And if you have people from different regions, from different cultures, from different norms mixed in one places, you do not have general norms. So for people, it's very difficult to live without this general understanding, what they can expect from any other people they communicate with. Second, it's generation conflict. Because if the reality changed radically, you cannot use the prescriptions for life from the previous generations. They just do not work. They do not lead to success because the conditions changed. And it is the very serious basis for generation conflict. The third thing is clan and the domination of clan and corruption roots of vertical mobility. I will not explain it in details because it needs quite a lot of time to speak about it, so just let's take it for giving. And all these things are being happened in a very conflict and violent environment because the societal transformation of this type always happen in the situation of conflict and violent environment. What is the result of these very serious and very uncomfortable processes? The young person who has to do something with his or her life, who just enter this life, they face the situation of the lack of order, of the lack of justice. They feel the need to find new explanations and new guidance in the world because the explanations and the guidance from the previous generation, they just do not work. And they are not immune to violence because their socialization happened in the conflict and violent environment. I will briefly explain this situation on the basis of the experience of Dagestan in 1990s. What actually happened in the Republic? First is the general, for Russia, situation of collapse of communist system and ideology, which is actually a very serious route for enemy, for this lack of established rules and norms. Second, it's erosion of the traditions in rural areas because of economic factors, because of social differentiation on the basis of wealth, because of influence from the cities. It's globalization, and it's also the general factor for Russia. But in most regions of Russia, we have European, Western globalization. In the North Caucasus in general, in Dagestan in particular, we have not only Western, but also Islamic globalization. And it's the very specific situation with the Dagestan cities, because we have simultaneously to witness two processes. First, it's inflow of people from the mountains, from the rural areas, to the cities, mainly to Makhachkala. And second, it's outflow of Russians and mainly urban educated local people from Dagestan. So there is no basis for the norms, for the culture of the cities at all. Those who actually were the representatives of this culture, they went out, and those who have no idea and no understanding and no feeling of the urban culture, they move in. And of course, it's also a very serious source for the enemy. And then we have the very tough and violent situation of Chechen's wars, which really influenced the situation not only in Chechnya, but in the other regions of the North Caucasus. Why the Islamic fundamentalism is the adequate answer, the adequate response for these challenges which young people in the North Caucasus face? First, it's the set of very strict rules and moral codes, which is very important for the people who do not experience the rules of the game, who really need to have at least some rules. So Islam provides this set of rules and moral codes for them. Second, it's the legitimization of generation conflict, because the word of God is more important than the word of father. And it's actually the expression which one of the young representatives of Islamic fundamentalism used in conversation with me. So it's their position on this. It's the legitimization of protest, because from the point of view of this ideology, the real order and the real justice can be established only in the Islamic State. So it's the understanding, it's the explanation of the lack of order and the lack of justice in the society where they live, and it's the goal for the protest, it's a goal for the fight, and it's the legitimization of this process and this fight against this existing state. And at last, it's the global Islamic community, which partly substitute and partly is an addition for the traditional kinship relations, because it's some type of global kinship. They consider all the Muslims as their brothers and sisters, and the community as the instrument to provide support and protection for the members. And it's also very important. So, for me, the most important thing about this first myth is that there is a very strong internal objective factors which support demand for radical Islamic ideology in the North Caucasus. It's not just some ideology which is brought in because some enemies wanted to bring it in. It is the ideology which is the response for the very strong demand determined by the internal factors in the structure of the society. So the second myth. The second myth is that all supporters of radical Islam are, by definition, separatists and potential terrorists. And here we just come to this problem of terminology. Because actually radical Islam is a very bad terminology term. We do not understand actually what does it mean. And in conventional understanding, radical Islamists is by definition the Islamic fundamentalist, is the Islamist, so it's the supporter of political Islam, and it's jihadist and separatist. Actually, it's not true, as there are very different views and very different positions on all these issues in the Russian Islamic community. And of course, it's great simplification what I'm going to comment on now, but just not to make it even less understandable than it is, I will try to simplify it as much as possible. So it's possible to separate three ideologically different groups among those people who are supporters of Islamic fundamentalism. Let's start with this term. So first, it's non-political supporters of Islamic fundamentalism. It's people who want to have the Islamic appearance. They want to educate people in Islam. They want to perform all Islamic rituals. But they think that their obligation is restricted by themselves and their family. And it's the obligation of the ruler to organize the society in the right way. And the ruler has to be responsible for the God to do it, not themselves. The second group is those people who are really determined to create Islamic State, to create Caliphate, but in some indeterminate future, because now Muslims are not prepared. And so it's necessary to educate them, it's necessary to be active in political sphere and to defend their rights, and by these processes in some future, the conditions will be created for the construction of Islamic State. These people, many of them, prefer to work in a legal sphere, and they are actually people rights defenders, NGO leaders, work in political sphere, but in the framework of the legal system of the society. And just the third block are those who are really the supporters of the violent ways, the supporters of jihad. And it's three absolutely different groups from the point of view of their understanding of their position in the society and the future of the society where they live. What actually determines the choice? I'm not sure that I can now present for you the complete menu of the factors, but at least some of them. First, it's accident. Whom the person who started to be interested in fundamentalistic Islamic ideology meets first, and who can transmit his views of the his understanding of what is the proper Islamic ideology to this person. It's an important factor, but it's not the universal one. because there are quite a lot of people among North Caucasus youth who try to consciously choose the type of ideology they are going to support. And here the other factors started to work. Socialization conditions. We have already talked about it when I told about violence and conflict as a very important factor which actually destroys the immunity for violence and for war. But also the criminal socialization actually raises the probability for the person to be the supporter of the violent way. And not only the violence in the society, but also the violence in the family can affect it. The challenge of vertical mobility. I also have already told that in official sphere, the channels for vertical mobility are mainly based on clan and corruption, and there are no real ways for vertical mobility for those who have no access to them. But there is also a peaceful protest sphere where people also can experience some vertical mobility. They can, for example, be journalists from opposition or NGO leaders or something like that. And if these channels are open and the state doesn't oppress them, there is more probability that more people are going to choose these peaceful ways. Open or closed communities, very interesting thing. If quite radical people are open for communication with other communities and are in the process of discussion with them, and are doing common initiatives with them, there is much less probability that these people, even being quite radical in their views, would try to use violent ways and started the military operations. And the also very interesting thing, the balance of costs and benefits. It's not my expression, it's the expression which I also heard from one of the representatives of these communities. So if people understand that by non-violent way, they actually can achieve some of their goals, at least some moderate goals. And if they understand that the costs of violent ways are much higher than the costs of non-violent ways, more people will choose non-violent ways. It's quite a rational calculation. I was really surprised, but it seems to be the case. As I was asked to be brief, it's just 20 minutes, which we agreed on. No, I think I will stop here because I can talk quite a lot about the policy of Russian government towards these groups of Muslims and how this policy should be changed. But I'm not sure that it's just the thing you would like to listen from me most of all, so maybe now you will ask questions and I will try to answer. Thank you.
Okay, so you can put your hand up, and I will start by asking you exactly that question. Russian policies on the Northern Caucasus, what role do they play? Then you can put up your hands.
Okay, should I answer just question by question, or I can answer all of them? Okay. So, actually, it's a very serious issue because the policy of the Russian government is based on just those myths which I tried to describe. And so actually the results of this policy in many areas are very counterproductive, because it's the pressure on all Islamic communities, both those who are the supporters of violent and of non-violent ways. And of course, those who are supporters of non-violent ways, it's much easier to find them and to make pressure on them, because they are in the legal field. And so, as they experience very serious pressure, those who are supporters of violent ways started to be stronger. And it's the really very serious problem. And I think that people who make decisions should understand this and change this policy radically.
Okay, so do we have a roaming mic? We have the first question here from Tove Gravdal from the Norwegian newspaper Morgenbladet.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear what you're saying. You mentioned that poverty and depression cannot explain why people are recruited into these communities. But can you say something about the level of education, whether that has a role? And secondly, do you also have an overview of how many are actually traveling to Iraq and Syria to fight with the Islamic State and other jihadist groups in that region? From Caucasus.
Yes, I understand. I'll answer. The question about education is a very good question, because here we can witness the situation which is quite common for developing countries, where the people from the rural areas, from the mountains, they come to provincial universities with not very good level of education. But actually, after that, they have very high aspirations, very high hopes about the possibilities of vertical mobility. But there are no ways. First, because there are no ways of vertical mobility in accordance with the level of education. And second, because the level of education is not good enough to provide such a push for vertical mobility. And actually, it's really a very serious factor of radicalization of Muslims of Muslim youth in the North Caucasus. About the Islamic State, I do not know the figures which are different from those figures which were in official information. But I would say that it's a very serious factor of split in all the groups of North Caucasus Muslims. Because even among jihadists, who think that actually the Islamic State make no good for jihad, because they use improper methods. And of course, for those who are the peaceful supporters of Caliphate, it's actually the discreditation of the idea of Caliphate. And for them, it's also a very serious challenge. And again, the idea that all the Islamic fundamentalists support ISIS, support Islamic State, is absolutely wrong.
Okay, so we have a question here. Could you please state your name and affiliation?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. My name is Marte Stabdar. I'm a student at the Norwegian School of Economics. I'm just curious, you divided the fundamentalist Islamic in 3 different blocks. Is it possible to divide the Islamic population in percentages in those 3 groups?
Of course not. Huh? It's not the area where you can use quantitative methods of social service. Not at all.
Okay, so in the front here.
My name is Kåre Hauge. I'm a former Norwegian Foreign Service officer. And I would like to give you a compliment for your English, since you said at the very beginning that you hadn't spoken for a long time. Слишком редко слышится такой отличный английский язык от русского.
Unfortunately, I cannot say thank you in Norwegian, which would be natural in this.
My question has to do with how much of the radicalism which we usually call it radical Islam, in the Caucasus dates from modern sources, which means after World War II. And how much of this dates all the way back to the historic opposition to Russia and Russians among the peoples of the Caucasus? Because this is not a new phenomenon, as we all know. Thank you.
Actually, I do not think that maybe this has its influence, but I do not think that it's a critical factor, because actually, as far as I understand, again, it's a very difficult area of research, but as far as I understand, actually the first groups of radical Islamists, of the supporters of fundamentalist Islam in North Caucasus, they were not very radical, and they were not very anti-Russians. It was actually this split between Salafi and Sufi Islam views, and it's their internal conflict. And only with Chechen war, they really started to be much more radical. They told that we cannot live in this state which try to oppress Muslims, and we should create caliphate. At least it's my understanding of the situation. Again, I'm doing this research only for 7 years. Those things which the other people saw by their own eyes, I have to reconstruct by the research. But my understanding is this.
Anne Husvik-Bonde from the Human Rights House Foundation. Thank you for interesting presentation. I wonder, you mentioned Dagestan especially. Could you say something about the results you found in Chechnya and Cherkessia, and if you compare the results, how it differs?
Okay. Chechnya, it's I only started my work in Chechnya, and it's not very easy to do it. I have a feeling, again, it's feeling only, that the processes which led to radical Islam in Chechnya were quite similar to those which happened in Dagestan. But it's just the first impression. It's my hypothesis. I have either to prove or not to prove it in my further research. And about Kabardino Balkaria and Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, it's a very interesting thing, because those two republics are very similar. They are almost twins. But in one of them, we have very difficult situation with Islamic radicalism and terrorism. And in the other, the situation is, there is no problem almost at all. And for me, the most interesting question is why. I think that the difference in policy in these two places actually play a very important role. Because if in Kabardino-Balkaria they always try to press and oppress, in Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, in many cases, they try to negotiate. I think I will not go to any more details, but the substance is this.
Thank you. My name is Kirsten Tarmjede. I'm a Norwegian politician in the Norwegian Parliament. You're talking about the non-violent supporters of Islam, and of course it's nothing wrong with Islam as long as it's non-violent. But there is still another aspect of Islam, and it's the Sharia laws. And is it that the non-violent supporters of Islam, are they also supporters of Sharia, meaning that they are not against the individual rights, they are against the secular laws that we and the freedoms that we like to have in the Western world?
I had, of course, it was not the quantitative research, but I asked several people in the mountains, in Makhachkala and in Nalchik, if they would have to vote for Sharia laws from tomorrow. Of course, all of them were supporters of Islamic fundamentalists. Would you vote for it? Very interesting result. In the mountains, yes, definitely. Today, tomorrow, immediately. In Makhachkala, not now. Two versions. First, not now, people are not ready for it. Second, I personally will vote, but all the others will not. Yeah. In Kabardino Balkaria, people just refuse to talk about it. No, I can only theoretically. It was just some type of hysteria. So I think I answered it.
And I think maybe for this session, this is the final question, and then we move on to Malashenko, and then there will be time for questions at the very end again.
My name is Ingvald Godal. I was a member of parliament and an election observer in Chechnya in 1997. Then we were told that if there was a conflict between religion and Chechen tradition would prevail. Is that true, or is it still like that?
It's very difficult to answer this question because the common understanding is that, yes, now it is the case. It was not the case in the Second Chechen War. People understand that they were wrong, and now the tradition prevails. I'm not sure that it's true. I have a feeling that it's much more complicated. But the interesting thing, maybe it's just the last what I told, but it's really interesting. I talked with the person who participated in the Second Chechen War on the side of Chechen's Islamists. He was the person from Grozny. I asked him why did he started to support this movement. He told me the following story. Again, it's just one story. I had no time to prove or not to prove it. From the start of the Dudayev's era, a lot of people from mountains came to Grozny. Actually, Dudayev based his power on the people from rural areas. And they told to those who lived in Grozny, and Grozny, of course, it was the culture which was quite separate from the rural culture. You are bad Chechens. You are not the right Chechens. You do not follow traditions properly. You take wives from Russians. And so we do not need you in our Chechen state. And you can leave our property, our flats for us, and actually go away. And then Islamists came and told, first, there are no good Chechens or bad Chechens, because all of us are good Muslims, and all of us are brothers. And second, it's impossible just to take the flat or the property of the person who is a bad Chechen because they are the Sharia laws. And you can do everything only according to Sharia law. And at least part of the urban youth started to support them. And I think it's also a very interesting story about traditions and religion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Irina, for being so modest on making claims. That's very nice and very good for a researcher. I would just like to give an opportunity to the Chechens in the audience to answer that question if they want, if they have a different view. Mariam, you need the mic. Wait for the mic.
Just a comment regarding the, when you mentioned that Chechen Islamism came in during the Second War, 1999.
I think she said first.
Oh, did you say first? The
Islamism.
The Chechen Islamism, when it came to Chechnya, because
It started from the first one.
From the first one, because it was in my opinion, it was the rebellion, not the Islamism, because the religion didn't have anything to do with that in the beginning. And because after Dudayev was gone, Maskhadov came, which is also had anything to do with the Islamism. But then later on, when the conflict sort of calmed down, that's when the radical Islamism sort of prevailed and became more flowering, in my opinion. But you're the researcher. I don't know how you saw it.
Yes.
I have a little different view of this according to the results of the research. Actually, the Islamic views were the part of the rebellion movement in the first war, and for me it was the new information from my research. I didn't know about it and I didn't read too much about it, but people told me that it was the case. And the Islamist groups started to be more powerful in between war period. And of course, the Second Chechen War was mainly led by the Islamist groups. At least it's my understanding.
And for those who want to read more about that, they can read an article I have published on the topic, which is available on the NUPI net site. I think we're going to give Irina a big hand. And then we are going to welcome Alexej Malashenko, who some of you might know from before. He has been here several times. He works at the Carnegie Center in Moscow. And he has done extensive research for very many years on Islam, both in Russia and in Central Asia. We're very happy that you're here again. And he will speak on the topic of Russia in the context of the global Islamist phenomenon. Welcome.
Thank you so much for coming. It seems sometimes that the people, not only in Norway but everywhere, including Russia, is a little bit tired of Islamic problems. But anyway, they continue to exist, and to my mind, it's forever. It's very difficult to speak, to comment something after Irina. So even I don't know what to do. I have to repeat something, but anyway, I'll try. I'm not sure that it will be successful to give a little bit, some picture to depict it. And about Islamic radicalism, and about Russian position, and in general about this problem. First of all, about radical Islam, I'm totally agree with you. Some radical, when we try to apply to Islam, it's a little bit artificial. So what does it mean? I don't know. To my mind, any religion must be radical. Otherwise, it will never survive. A month ago, when I was in Grozny, I dare to pronounce that Prophet Muhammad was a radical. And I received an answer, shut up. Never tell it here in Chechnya. But still, if he wasn't radical, I doubted that at the moment we could get an Islam. So without some Muhammad, some radicalism. Next problem. Also, it is connected with notions. How we call Islam? Wahhabism, fundamentalism, Salafism, Islamism, sometimes nativism. That I don't understand what does it mean, but it exists. More jihadism. What is the difference? I don't know. Of course, if there is some dispute between specialists in Islam, deep specialists in Islam, what is the difference between Salafism and Wahhabism? Of course, finally it will be very interesting. But for public, for politicians, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. As to me, I'll try to use Islamism. Why? Because I'm not a theologist. I'm not a big specialist in Islam, but for a normal man, Islamism, it means something from religion itself, something from policy, something from social problems. Yes, it's enough. And besides, when we use some Islamism, we may understand their goals, the goals of Islamists, to create something Islamic. If we, Islamists, are able to realize Islamic State, okay, why not? It doesn't mean that immediately we have to cut some hands, heads, and so on. But if we have a chance to create something Islamic, as to me, I'm sorry, I don't believe in the possibility of creation of Islamic State. Like, by the way, in Russia, a lot of people at the moment continue to talk about Orthodox state. It's a stupidity. But if somebody believes, we have respect at this position, and this is our problem. I don't believe in an Islamic state. It's a nonsense. But anyway, if millions of Muslims want to do it, I have to respect, I have to try to understand them. So this is a problem, and I don't know if we have a solution. At the moment, we speak all the time about Islamic State in the Middle East, but maybe it's a certain deviation. Maybe I would say it's too much of Islamism. But indeed, so they want to do it. So it's a common problem. It's a problem of Muslim world, it's a problem of European world, and by the way, it's a problem of China. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, about this Islamism, I'm sorry, once again, when it began to come, when it began to arrive, and what are the causes of Islamism, not only in Dagestan or in Chechnya, in Caucasus, because Caucasus, I'm sorry, it's a very small a piece of land. But at the same time, we have similar process everywhere in Muslim world. It doesn't mean that all Muslims want to create Islamic State and all Muslims are Islamist, but this is a trend, very active, very popular. So when it began to arrive, when it began to arrive, well, it means it started in the 70s, and the end of the 70s. Why? Because those who share the idea of so-called Islamism, they wanted to receive a certain alternative. Alternative to what? To Western model, to Soviet model, something Islamic. Alternative, yeah? And it was because of their disappointment with their previous political, economic, social experience. So a part of Muslim society turned to Islam. That was the first steps. The real first and very radical step was Islamic revolution in Iran. That was a start, some to my mind. And then the ideas of Islamic alternative began to develop. So that's normal, yeah? And even now, so we see some of the same things. Because if you ask me what was the goal of Islamic revolution in Iran, the main goal was the creation of Islamic State. That's no doubt. Some Sharia type. Now we have some of the same thing in Middle East, Islamic State, but by another method. But as a phenomenon, it continues to be, and it will be. It will be. I totally agree with you about the problem of Islamism, jihadism, extremism, and so on. To simplify the situation, there is a trend, the representatives of which want to create Islamic State in a thousand of years. Education, Muslim society has to be prepared for it. Some level. So we have to fight, we have to do it. not tomorrow, but after tomorrow, we have to organize some Islamic parties and so on. And the next, some level, so extremism. Islamic State, Islamism, tomorrow or even today, by all means. But there is a difference between all kind of levels. Huge, some distance, yeah? And I do believe that it's possible to talk with those who in general are talking about Islamic State, with those who organize some manifestation in the support of Islamic State, of Islamic ideas, and so what to do with extremists? To exterminate? Okay, I'm glad. But it's impossible to exterminate even extremism because, and even Islamists, well, all districts, because the roots will some remain. That's no doubt, and we are watching it, well, every day. And don't forget that the main idea of Islam is that Islam is the best and the final religion. So this is the only Islam who is able to give you an exceptional, the best model of development. It's very logical. If Islam is the best religion and the last religion, why not? The only Islam who can give you a model. And if you compare the ideas of Islam with what we have in the West, in Europe, in America, what we have in Russia, all the time crises, why not to think about Islamic as a model? And I understand the logic of those who support the idea of Islamic State. I am against other methods. But in generally, we don't know. Don't forget that, for instance, some communism, also a quasi-idea, a quasi-religious idea, it derived from Karl Marx, some weeks at birth, yes? And the idea of Islamic State, it comes from Almighty God. It's much better. So the problem to follow logic. Otherwise, we'll never understand each other. How to coexist, nobody knows. This is a problem. This is a problem which have been emerged years. And now this is a problem is extremely important. And I repeat, as I told you before, we have no solution. It's not because we are so stupid, but because the situation is totally new. Totally new. Just, I do believe that I don't believe in the possibility to get rid of Islamic State in Middle East. You can organize a lot of coalitions, but it will stay. It will stay. I don't know how. Even more, I don't know where. If this Islamic State tomorrow disappears in the Middle East, it will re-emerge in other forms. Indeed, this is a problem, and I don't want to tell that this is a bad or good. It has no solution. It has no solution. Let's imagine the ground operation against Islamic State. What does it mean? It will mean civil war. Civil war, and at the same time, the war between the West and Muslim world. I have no brains to understand it. The more we talk about it, more we propose some solutions, some less we can do something. When Islamic State emerged a year ago, well, it was a certain deviation, it was a stupidity, and it was possible to exterminate it, this week. But it survived. And the more and more, they began to talk about legitimacy of this thing. Something, it's not a state, it's not the what, I don't know. So, what kind of solution? I have a chance to talk to some Russians, some around Putin's administration. Officially, they say that, well, it has to be exterminated, and it's possible, and it continues to exist because of American policy, blah, 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 and so on. In the United States, in the State Department, they are astonished. Indeed, I heard from American diplomat this expression, we are astonished. Well, so you're welcome. But what you will do? In France, there is a shock. So we continue to think, but we can do nothing. And one of the mistakes which has been done in 90s, a lot of specialists in Islam, including very well-known in France, in Germany, in America, in Russia too, by the way, they wrote about the end of the political Islam, the end of Islamism, of Islamic some radicalism. And all the time they repeated, a lot of some colleagues, well, some bloody Islamism, this political Islam, it's something very primitive and stupid, and it will disappear. In the end of 90s, wow. Even more, I put the same question to Olivier Roy. It was some 2 years ago. Did it disappear? Yes, he said. If Islamism disappeared, so with whom we some deal at the moment? I don't know. So this move in scholars' brains is so deep that I don't understand. A couple of words about migration. So a lot of books were written and we'll write about it thousands. Also, sometimes it seems I don't understand the situation. I think the problem of Islamic migration everywhere, in Europe, in Russia, and not as far as Russia is concerned, Islamic migration from Caucasus or, general Islamic migration from Central Asia, from Azerbaijan, some domestic migration from Caucasus too, it's forever. Even I don't want in that case use the notion of migration. Why? Because peoples move, as it was before in the history. And we have to think not in the frame of some migration, some bloody migrants, yeah? But about representatives of different people who are moving. And we don't know what to do. I don't know about figures. So they say that at the moment in Europe we have 45 millions of Muslims. So let's shout about it. It's a tragedy. No, it's a normal situation. It's a typical normal situation, like in Russia, where we have 16.5 million of Muslims, some Russian citizens, and 5 million some migration, and they live in Russia. They try to create Islamic space, not Islamic State, but Islamic space. It's normal because they are millions. What we have to do? There was a question about governmental Russian politics to Islam, to Muslims. It is absent. It is absent. We have many laws, many documents in which somebody tried to explain how we have to deal with, but we do nothing. And then Putin and government, they suddenly become astonished about emergence, Islamic, some radicalism, once again, I'm sorry, in Ural and Siberia. And don't you know, for instance, that some dozen of Muslims, of Russian Muslims, of Central Asian migrants who live in Siberia and Ural and Volga River region, they are going to Islamic State. 2 years ago, it sounded like a nonsense. But some recruiting of Muslims to Islamic states, to Middle East, is becoming more and more significant. And Russian officials, the head of security services, he openly recognized, and it was published, we cannot stop them. So, I beg your pardon. If on some level, the level of security services of Russian Federation, and it's not a secret, he wrote about it openly, we can do nothing. We don't understand. And more we talk about Islamic problem, less we understand it. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. In each newspaper, practically every day, somebody once again tries to explain to the society, to people, what have we do? Just I don't want to talk a lot about the relations between Emirat of Caucasus and Islamic State. It's another topic. It's a very interesting topic. But even now, officially, they don't know what to do. Even they don't know how many Russian Muslims are going to Middle East. It hesitates. Believe me, and my colleague Ahmed Yarlikapov, I think he will support me, between 2,000 and 7,000. Something concerning Uzbekistan. Last week they published an information, or 1,000 or 5,000 Uzbeks Muslims. So we have a choice. And if we want to understand the real situation around Islamic State, within Islamic State, a basing of information from internet, it's nonsense. So we don't know. So we talk. I have 5 minutes. Yes. So about some Russia, Islamism, Middle East, Islamic State, and just and you see, I can tell a lot about it. It's possible to read in newspapers. So one thing that sometimes newspapermen and scholars they miss this problem. Of course, Russia is against Islamic terrorism. That's okay. Putin all the time talk about necessity to create a broad coalition. But as I began to understand, at the moment we'll have 2 coalitions. So stupidity, but no, I'm not a politician. But if you carefully read some trends of Russian official propaganda, and if you try to compare some trends of Russian official propaganda with something that you can take from documents of Islamic State, you will see similarities. And the main of this is xenophobia. Xenophobia. And Russia and my beloved Islamic State is directed against West. It doesn't mean that Russian troops will participate in the war and protect Islamic State, never. But anyway, there is a common enemy, a common adversary, so West. I don't believe in the war, I don't believe, but I remember Soviet times, when the notion of national liberation movement existed in Russian official ideology and propaganda. Why not to change national liberation movement against a religious liberation movement? And it will be very quickly understood. The case of some Charlie Hebdo, yeah? Also, in Russia official propaganda, that was some European culture, and Europe and the Western generally, it was who is to blame? Non-Muslims. So this act, this terrorist act, was a reaction against some Europe, against European civilization, well, society, who made a lot of mistakes and who provoked Islam. So I don't understand who provoked whom. And in the same time, the same month, in January, in Grozny, Ramzan Kadyrov organized a manifestation with participation about 1 million, so maybe less. And people, some Muslims came from all Russian countries, from all some Russian regions, And the main slogan, were it was a European provocation. It is a problem of some European civilization. Practically no one slogan against terrorism. And all people who came to this manifestation, they weren't Islamist or jihadist or something like that. No, they were some normal Muslims. So the anti-Western and Islamic and Russian propaganda some reach its goal. The main enemy is West. And what I want to, just a minute. Also, the last sentence, so very provocative. Since, well, 10 years, some dozen years, we are reading about some clash of civilization. And each of us, of course, some tells no, never. But if it's not a clash of civilization, what is it? I'm sorry, everywhere. Also, I refuse to use the word, some clash. But maybe we have to recognize that there is a certain misunderstanding or frictions on the level of what? Of political, religion, civilization. I don't know. Sometimes maybe it's possible to use the term crisis of identities on the global scale, maybe. But to close the eyes and think that Islamic State is a deviation, migration in Russia or in Europe, it's a problem of time. It's a forever. It's a historical, cultural, and religious some process, and we aren't ready for it. Yes, I'm sorry to be so pessimist. Maybe indeed because I am dealing with all kind of crisis, but anyway, when I try to find an issue, a normal issue, I feel that I'm too weak to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'd just like to, as Alexej already has, briefly say that Ahmed Yalikapov is also here. He spoke to the similar audience last year, and he has just been doing also field work in the Northern Caucasus, looking into processes of recruitment to IS, I think. So if there are any questions pertaining to that, maybe you can feel free, Ahmed, to also chip in to the other answers. To give the answers. So if you could please show your hands, you will get a mic. Yeah, the back from VG, big Norwegian newspaper.
Yeah, my name is Erlend Arntzen, journalist at VG newspaper. Simple, stupid question. Why have so many left from Russia and Caucasus to Syria and Iraq? And are there any Russia or Caucasus specific factors that explains it compared to other regions and nations?
Stupid questions and maybe stupid answer. Well, as usual, they say about Islamic propaganda. And they are professionals who try to prove that in Islamic State it's something much more better than Russia, than the rest of the world. Indeed, they are successful. But at the same time, there is a part of young generation, and not only Muslim generation, who lives in the total disappointment with what we have in Russia. I don't want to exaggerate it, but there is a lay of young generation, not only Muslims, yeah, who are disappointed and who indeed attempt to search to find place where they can apply the energy to reach a social justice, a political justice. So maybe it's very primitive, but it is. And the last, those who some recruit, they are very good professionals. And they use all methods, including internet, including some private meetings, seminars, and as I told you before, officials, some Russian officials, they recognize that they aren't able to stop it. And it will continue from all territories of Russia, not only from Chechnya or from Dagestan. I know a lot of examples of people who left from Siberia, from Ural.
Thank you for your stupid question. It's very, actually, it's a very good question because we have a lot of causes why young people, young generation is living for ISIS. First of all, it's not only the case that they are living for ISIS because we have a huge level of migration within Russia from North Caucasus. For example, we have the native people, Nogai people. 40% of them in 20 years left North Caucasus for Russian gas producing north. 40%. And yes, we have a huge number of youngsters who live, who are going to the Middle East. 2,000 to 7,000, it's estimate, but I think that the right number is 5,000 because, for example, we have 3,000 only Chechens, but 500 from Chechnya and 2.5 thousand from Europe, from all around Europe, joined ISIS. And also 2,000 from the North Caucasus, mainly from Dagestan. Mainly from Dagestan, it's because of economic crisis, it's because of lack of social lifts. It's because of, you know, also, yeah, total disappointment. And I think that a very important thing is that ISIS is using eschatology. You know, they are saying that the last battle between evil and, you know, and Muslims will be in Dabiq. Dabiq is the city in Syria. And they say that you have to join this battle and you have to be close to this place. And they are claiming to make hijrah. Hijrah is movement to the Middle East to be part of, you know, this good force against evil. And this is a very, you know, important part of this work on recruitment, you know. And yes, we have a very good recruitment network in Russia. It's very good. It's very, you know, it's becoming very strong now. Yeah, we are witnessing that it is becoming very, very strong. That's it.
Well, let me add so one figure. 3 years ago, when if you put me some your question 3 years ago, it was about 200 or 300 of Muslims who came to, who arrived to Middle East. At the moment, so there are thousands.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, now we have two.
Thank you. I have a question on definitions, because you said that you're not a theologist, and I was wondering then, do you also perceive the difference between calling Islam for radical Islam and then calling something for Islamization, for jihadism, for separatism? Do you see the difference between these definitions of these separatism or all the things? And then I have a follow-up question to Irina, if that's possible, because she mentioned that the Russian decision makers who made these policies to counteract the radical Islam in Russia do not see these differences. And in what way would it be possible for them to understand the religion or the problem in a way that this could be possible to counteract in a way that is effective and doesn't lead to something even worse? Thank you.
Well, of course, there is a difference between between terms of like separatism and Islamism and so on, because separatism, it may be secular, and but as example, Salafism, Wahhabism, and fundamentalism. The key word in Arabic, wusuluddin, some roots of deen, of religion, yes? So the main slogan, the main idea, the main concept, some concept to go back and then to jump forward. And then we can discuss about from which situation, from which some leaders, Salafiyya derived or some Wahhabism, some derived, but these are rather nuances. But the main target, the main goal, is to Islamize any society, or to re-Islamize, to lead them back to Islam, and created something, some like Islamic State, or Caliphate, or Emirate. It depends on the country.
Yes, please.
So if I understand the question correctly, is the question if it's possible for the decision makers to understand the real situation, yeah? This was the question, yeah. Oh, actually, firstly, my idea was that they just do not know. And we have our mission to understand ourselves, to explain to them, and then they will understand that it's possible to change the policy. It seems that I was wrong, because, I know, I was very naive, because there are very strong logic in the policy itself, and there are very strong stereotypes that everything which is stranger, which is not ours, is against us. And actually, it's the things which Alexei talked a lot about during his presentation. And there is an illusion of effectiveness, because now there is very little terrorism in the North Caucasus. Illusion. I told illusion. Illusion is the key word, yes. Because actually the situation is not as good as this illusion. Because at least I was told by many people in the North Caucasus that the young generation, very young generation, 15, 16 years old, they in mass support ISIS, because they are disappointed even by the local jihadists. They are not radical enough. So actually, it's the potential for a very serious aggravation of the situation. I do not think that now it's possible to change the policy seriously. I think that some things should be done by the expert community. For example, we just discussed it with Alexei before our presentation, that actually we have to agree how to unify terminology. Even if it's not very correct, even if it's just rough terminology, but we should use the same words just for people to get accustomed to them. And, but I do not think that radical changes are possible.
Okay, I saw a hand, but now I've forgotten it. Inna.
Thank you. My name is Irina Starodubrovskaya. I'm from the Norwegian Healthcare Committee. Thank you for your both presentations. I have two questions. The one, I think I heard you once, Alexei, on radio in Russia, or a radio article, on the idea that each religion should develop and go through crises, and just compare to history that also Christianity has had the bloody wars and identity crisis and all these processes, also compared with what we observe now with Islam, that it's a modern kind of religion that has to go through these crises. My question is whether you see these time limitations, you see these in comparison with this kind of process as development of religion and identity crises. And second question is on if you look at Russia and as a post-imperium or empire, how would you see and how Russian state was built historically for hundreds of years? How this development of these religious groups has to do with the future geopolitical process in Russia. I mean, now we observe now the fall of state. It's not logical, not adequate ruling of Russian state. How do you see this process in terms of geopolitical and territorial development of Russia? Thank you.
Well, your question is understood, but I have no time to write a book about it. So, if to simplify some of the situation, first of all, I cannot predict the fate of Russia. Yes? Nobody could predict some perestroika. Practically nobody could predict Putin at the moment. So what do you want? As to some religious, ethnic problem, at the moment we observe two positions. One very, very official position presented by secular, some politician. Russia is multinational and multi-confessional state. That's right, yes? But if you read some publications and if you hear our patriarch of clergymen, more and more they say about that Russia is an Orthodox Russian state with some minorities. By the way, there is a pretext for conflict between Church and Islam. As usual, you can see it on the surface, but there is a very deep conflict because a Russian Orthodox, some Church, patriarch, even in particular a year ago, he repeated a lot of times about orthodoxy, about necessity to use some orthodoxy and orthodox, some church, as a skeleton of Russian development. Some Russian idea has to somehow reside on Islamism, on Orthodoxy. Yeah. This is problem because it pushed toward Russian nationalism, and of course it creates, as I told you, some misunderstanding with Islam. Just even I assisted at an event where a deputy of patriarch who told a lot about that Russia is an Orthodox state and so on, and he was corrected by people from Putin administration. Because they understand the differences, and as to how Russian state was built, some read books about it. But anyway, to my mind, empire, Russian empire, since 16th century, some Russian state, or some more Moscow state. It became multinational country, multinational state. This is my vision.
Yes, a question there.
It was more a comment also to the question from Vega. You mentioned the reason why there are more people going, more extremism with disappointment. You mentioned these things to the state, but I think it's strange that none of you have said anything about the leadership, the reactions, like with Kadyrov's regime in Chechnya. They actually punished people in a collective punishment after the last terrorist attack in December, where they burned down the houses of the relatives of the extremists. So my question is then, is this discussed, and do you include these kind of reactions from the state supported, these authorities supported by Putin? Is that discussed in your work when you look at the reactions from the state? Because it's not only disappointment, it's actually not the civilist way to react to this.
Well, about position of the Russian society, just I don't want to talk about the position of human rights, some organizations. It seems that a lot of Russians supported what Kadyrov did, because the explanation was, if their children are terrorists, somebody has to be punished, and somebody has to be responsible. So from that point of view, in Russia, some people, they don't like Kadyrov, but anyway, they understand him sometimes. That's true. And as to position of Putin, well, how can I explain it to you? If Putin is silent, remains silent, it means that he agrees. Well, somebody from parliament, somebody on TV, they can something. They can say something against. But if they feel that on the top, so they say some let it be, okay.
Yeah, at the back.
Hello, jeg heter Johan. I'm a researcher, visiting researcher here at NUPI. My question is more about the local political dynamics of global Islam. I mean, we know that these organizations, I mean, they might have new flags, but the institutions and what should we call it, command structures of a lot of these organizations, both in Africa, in Eurasia, and Russia, are long established. So my question is, how much of this local political competition, struggle for legitimacy locally drives what we call global Islam and what we see with people fighting both for ISIS and against ISIS in the Middle East right now?
Local, I don't understand.
So is there interfactional competition between Islamist groups where fighting in Syria is seen as something that drives their cause locally? That's kind of my question.
Sorry, maybe you asked me about Russia or about general.
Say it again.
Okay, so my question is basically, is there a local story explaining why these organizations?
Kind of organizations.
So I mean, Islamist I'm not an expert on the Caucasus. I'm not like, that's not my main focus. But so these organizations who are sending fighters to the Middle East. Yeah.
Caucasian Emirat.
Yeah. Is there a local political story?
Finally, I understood something. Well, first of all, just at the moment there is an intrigue in the relationship of Emirat of Caucasus and Islamic State. Some 2 months ago, the leadership of Caucasus Emirat, they declared that they became a part of Islamic State. But as to me, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it is a reality, because in Caucasus there is a lot of some different Islamic groups, and we don't know some their position. Well, I don't know, and nobody knows, because besides we didn't hear about the results of this unification. What they did? Well, let's imagine that indeed the Emirate of Caucasus, it became a part of Islamic State. But what are the results in Caucasus? So we have to think about it. And as the rest of Russia, I mean, recruiting on some Russian territories, it isn't linked with any Muslim groups or Islamic groups. It is some link with some network, some created by Islamic State. Of course, these the net is based on some Islamic circles or mosques, but it doesn't mean that we can talk in the frames of different Islamic groups. That's all.
Then we have a final question here at the front.
I don't think I need a microphone unless there is something.
It might be the...
Thank you very much. I'm a little surprised that your end of your presentation was very interesting to listen to you, but you were saying that there's nothing we can do, we can't stop them. If they want an Islamic state, they will get an Islamic state. If they want a caliphate, they want a caliphate. That's what's going to happen. That seems like a very defeatist point of view, and to take, at least as a politician, maybe you should do that and go home. But I don't want to live in an Islamic state. I don't want to live in a caliphate. And so I want to fight it. With words, of course, but you're saying that it's impossible. So should I just give up and sit down and say, okay, let's just put our hands in the air?
Well, it's a very good question, and I'll try to answer it because it's not so easy. However, well, there is several ways.
Is the mic not working?
No.
What? Can we take this
Yeah.
away and
Yeah.
speak into this one? Just take this one off. Okay.
There are different differences. Scenarios how to deal with them, how to deal with Islamic State. First of all, to combat, to exterminate, to bomb, to send troops, and so on. To my mind, it means nothing. It will lead to nothing. Second, to introduce step by step a certain split, and not only within Islamic State in Middle East, but to observe what they are doing in Afghanistan, in Central Asia, in Iran, by the way, Khorasan, at the moment it's a vilayet, well, everywhere, to observe, to find their mistakes, and maybe even unofficially to tell them, okay, if it is Islamic State, but it must be moderate Islamic State. But don't forget about Middle East itself. What kind of frontiers we'll have between some Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and so on. This is another problem. How to solve it? I don't believe that we'll come back to Middle East, which we had some 4 years ago. I cannot imagine. Yeah? And it would be very good to invite some moderate representatives of Islamic State to some coalitions in Iraq and Syria. How to do it? We have to search for the answer, because if we have no answer, Islamic State, Baghdadi, and people who are around him, they will feel that they are winners, and they will become more and more popular. So we have no time. We have to work. Just, I don't know, I'm against all kind of comparisons. But why some Putin finally solved the problem of Chechnya? He appointed Kadyrov, who was against Putin, who was one of the organizers of jihad. By the way, in recent, some Russian history, when it was Islamic so-called Basmachi movement, nobody could win them. But since the time they began a chair of kolkhoz, the Islamic resistance begins to disappear. Maybe it's possible to search in this some direction. We don't know. We don't know. And I think that well, how can I tell? How can I tell it? When some Arabic Spring began, the majority said that it was a road to democracy. Some experts said that it was a road to Islam. So this idea wasn't taken into consideration. So if we miss the moment also once again, I don't know. I don't know, because, well, that's all.
Okay. So thank you very much. Our time is up. I would just like to add a couple of phrases, as I've been working on Chechnya for very many years. For those of you who are writing and trying to understand, why do young people go off to ISIS, I really think one should be very careful in making general explanations, because the conditions in the Northern Caucasus are extremely different from what young people in Norway live in and come from. So I think Anne's point was really important. We're talking a society which has been repressed and violent, an extreme amount of violence applied against Chechnya for many years, and that is definitely part of the explanation. So just when you write your articles, keep in mind we're speaking about a different place than our very peaceful Norway here. Okay, thank you so much, and welcome back next time.